Welcome to the Reasons and Season podcast, where we're digging into ancient wisdom for modern living. We're meeting here in the season of winter, exploring all things water element. Inner listening, stillness, contraction, courage, and vitality. Check out the full digital interactive magazine platform at reasonsmag.com. Dive deep with experts in the field of seasonal living, lifestyle philosophy, food as medicine, kitchen herbalism, and the expression of art and culture as a vehicle for elemental existence.
Lullabies in your left ear. Love's lullabies in your left ear. Love's lullabies in your left ear. Lukewarm lullabies in your left ear. Plays perfectly. Love's lukewarm lullabies in your left ear. Plays perfectly. Lukewarm lullabies in your left ear. Plays perfectly. Lukewarm lullabies in your left ear. Plays perfectly.
Today's episode will explore the approaches to winter health as we delve into cold temperatures and solitude, looking at practices to preserve inner vitality and an exploration of the plant spirit of juniper, featuring Reasons and Season contributor Monticue Connally, who is an herbalist and plant spirit journeyman. So here we are in the season of winter, the process of the December month finding its way towards the winter solstice on December 21st. We're going to be exploring different strategies and themes for the process of this inward descent as we settle into these shorter days and longer nights and deeper dark turns towards the center of the core of our values and ourselves. Monticue, thanks for being here with us today. Talk with our listeners about your feeling at this time of the year as we move towards the full expression of winter.
You know, with the full expression of winter, I'm always a lot more cognizant of the sounds that my brain's making. It's almost like it's getting so quiet that sometimes you can hear a little or something, like you start feeling and hearing like certain fields that were closed off to you while the party was going on. Because that's what the spring is. The spring is like, hey, it's puberty. Hey, everything's in love and just, wanting to express itself. But here, everything's like, no, this is the party's over. Everything's going in, everything's pulling deeper. And so during this time, I start to feel a lot more introspective. As a matter of fact, for many years, actually, for many years, this time would actually bring me into a state of somewhat sadness. As soon as October, November, and the deeper it got, all the way to December, until after Christmas, usually I would go into a sort of a sad state. And I think a lot of that was due to my connection to like a lot of the plants and a lot of the sun and just the solar, all those things were kind of cut in half. What I mean? All those presences I was used to feeling. And it kind of pulled me in, but also made me somewhat sad. And so, getting into herbalism, astrology, and all these other things I'm into has kind of helped regulate and balance that, but that's the quietness is the first thing I would say. And I think some people don't realize that they actually are sad. Sometimes you're so busy and you're on autopilot for so long that by the time things are quiet and you're alone, I feel like winter kind of represents that aloneness, like that whole notion of I came into the world by myself. You know what I'm saying? I'm going to leave by myself. That whole like saying those kind of truths start to kind of radiate and say, wow, do I even like myself? When there's nothing happening after the party's over, like, what am I left with?
Right. And that kind of everything slowing down and making room for this inner listening. When we look into the constitutional concordances of the water element, we recognize that the kidneys open up to the ears. So you look at the shape of the kidneys, it's shaped kind of like an ear. And there is this, once everything quiets down, this deep inner listening that helps us get in touch with what is truly valuable. And, there is a natural process of death and of decline and beyond the metal energies of letting go, we're moving into fully putting things to rest. And that can sometimes feel depressing and it can feel sad because we are in this natural process of fully bringing things to a standstill.
Absolutely. And even with my depression around this season that used to kind of pop up, one of the best remedies for that was minerals, minerals, iodine, like keeping those sorts of things going, that saltiness, the water follows the salt, that whole thing. And I realized that sometimes I might feel colder, than I have to, because I wasn't honoring that there's certain minerals that the water wants to follow. There's certain things I don't think oftentimes we really realize how the water is so important into the transportation mechanisms that are happening within the body. People say, how would minerals make me warm? It's like, well, with the minerals, you have, not only do you have the minerals by themselves, of course, you're going to have water. And those two working together are going to feed the entire system, and create motion. And then all the little bacterias and things that are in there are going to break these things down, and things are going to be moving. But it's so important. Also motion during this time though, too, because everything doesn't have a pump either. Lymphatic system, there's these other aspects of us. So with the water, with the magnesium and, with the iodine and things of that nature, and then add a yoga posture on top of that, what I mean? Or some qigong or something, getting you moving. You're moving these things around, which leave you less susceptible to the depressions and things, because in our culture, we have this whole pull yourself up sort of mentality. It's just and we expect it usually to be mental, because we're a very mental culture. And it's just no, sometimes it's a very physical thing.
Well, and it's also that idea of keep going and keep pushing. People don't typically in our modern career pathways, we don't really follow the seasons, and we're kind of going full steam ahead in the dead of winter when the body is asking us to reprieve and to settle. I appreciate that you brought up the idea of the support of the minerals as being such a valuable resource that the water needs, not only in our body to begin to deliver those nutrients and that vitality into the system. But it's really, if you look at metal energy, the time of year that we're coming out of, everything is dying back and beginning to get composted into the ground. And then the groundwaters are taking that and basically extracting and vitalizing the water resources with these mineral structures. And that is the core of, if we only had water that was mineralized, we could survive for quite a while without food. And it's that dormancy that, the trees in their roots are pulling in from that groundwater. And it is that which they're essentially, that's really all they're running off of, right? There's less sunlight, there's less time in the day, things are turned inward, the surface is cold. However, there's this activity that is happening deep within the core that not only from a biophysical standpoint, the minerals are vital to all of that happening, but also from an alchemical standpoint, the energetics of what is really going on in the core nourishment and vitality of the inner juiciness, so to speak, of our deeper intimacy parts too.
Absolutely. And, it was actually around this time that, one thing, is with the colder weather, you start to feel certain aches, that you don't feel during other times of year. One year I started to feel a lot of achiness in one of my knees. And, and so along with that achiness kind of came that groaning sound, like, oh,
Which is the sound of the water element, that consistent
Exactly.
groaning, turning sound of a water that is still running through a creek or still running through a river.
Absolutely. And I thought it was gout, and so I was looking up all this stuff on gout. I never had gout. And of course my diet doesn't really, and my lifestyle doesn't really feed gout, so, I was just like, let me go get another perspective. So I went to the hospital and they did some x-rays and looked at my bones and found that I had some damaged cartilage. And you would expect that they would have a lot more to give to me or say to me, but all they could tell me was, oh, you're going to need a knee replacement because the cartilage is damaged in there. I'm like, a knee replacement? They're like, yeah, you're going to need that. Other than that, it's just going to degenerate your whole life and you're not going to be able to walk on it. And so I went home, and instead of feeding into that narrative, I went into some of my own research and found that there's very supportive minerals that help for bone regeneration. One of those being silica, is a very important mineral that is in horsetail, for example, which is another plant we could possibly talk about eventually. But so I went out and got some horsetail. I got some magnesium and and some other things, some MSM, things like that. But through my working with the minerals and drinking more water, all of a sudden I was able to. One day somebody threw a frisbee and I started chasing it. And when I caught it, I said, "Wait, I'm running," And ever since then, I've had normal function in that knee, But it all went back to what is the mineral that I'm missing. When my osteocytes and and these other parts of me that build bone, when they're looking for resources, what am I not supplying them? And through supplying those resources, by doing the research, by putting the silica in myself, by making sure I had some collagen in myself, and these things of that nature, they were able to have things to make sure that my knees were functioning properly, and I haven't had issues since.
Well, and getting closer to the embodiment of the self, the seasons are going to bring a highlight to the different areas that are ruled by these elements. And so water element rules the bones. So that foundational energy that is vital and passed on through our DNA at the core of our bone marrow, and then the core, deep foundational beliefs and structures that we stand on, the bones being the hardest structures in the body, they carry that genetic information and that foundational energy. And so when people start to learn these patterns about seasonal living and seasonal wellness, we're really able to begin to do things that support us in, recognizing what areas are being highlighted. But then also, this is the time of year that those backaches and bone issues and knee issues, which are also traditionally said to be ruled by the kidneys and our sexuality, which is water element stuff, those are when these kind of things get highlighted. You always notice somebody who's got premature aging signs a little bit older after the winter, a few more gray hairs on their head, because they've had a little less vitality. And so if we can spend time getting into reprieve, getting into dormant patterns, sleeping a little bit more, and resisting so much of this exterior expectations that we put on ourselves by opening our pores and sweating and, really having to push through, then we have the core reserves left, and we're not pulling away from what is needed at that time to preserve us and to help us endure through the winter. Which brings us into a conversation I'd like to open the Pandora's box of, which is that of the vital essence, or the Jing. Talk with our listeners a little bit about how this time of year highlights the Jing, what the Jing is in your words, and ways people can work to support that.
Yeah, with the Jing, in my experience, it's the root, it's the foundation. It's almost like the bones of our essence. like, talking about bones, and the Jing is established largely by our parents, and it's this resource, it's this reserve that really dictates our time on this planet. It can't be fully replenished. It can be, you can help it to slow down, but once you use it, that's it, as Americans, or as people of the newer era, whatever, we like to think that things are everlasting. We like to think like, don't put time limits on me, and don't, give me that. But we don't realize that with those structures bring balance. When you know that there's only a certain amount of time for something, you'll behave differently. When you'll have more respect for the time you do have. You'll respect these organs, and the thing about this Jing is that it can be wasted very, very easily in a system where we're always being pulled outward. It's like, go here, do this, run, right. You know what I mean? Like, expand. If you notice, like, all of our things around success are around expansion. You know what I mean? Like, where have you been around the world? How many men or women have you been with? How many books have you written? All this stuff is expensive over time. And if we're scattered in all different directions, if we don't have respect for the constraints, the things that are the architectural blueprints of us are not prisons, but like signposts of directions that we're supposed to move. We can't be everything to everyone and expand in all directions. And so, I've seen people deplete this stuff really fast, especially one way is through a lot of fear. A fear can be extremely draining, constantly in a fear state, constantly afraid you're going to get fired, constantly like haunted, constantly in some sort of fear state, whether it's something polarizing that happened at a young age or whatever it is. But and that's why, this is one of those times around the year where I tell people, it's okay to go back in time and talk to your younger self. And they're like, what do you mean? That's dumb. It doesn't make sense. My younger self is me. I'm grown. But I don't think they understand the dimensionality of life, like that there's parts of you still reliving these things, and they're very alive. Just because your body is moving, out of those spaces doesn't mean that those parts of you aren't still very alive and affecting how you act today. So by going back and saying, and especially during this time where everything's pulling in, going back in time and saying, hey, let's talk about myself. Hey, little Monticue, what happened to you? What is the narrative that 5-year-old Monticue is saying about that situation? And then saying, oh, you're still thinking about it from a child's perspective. You don't have context, you don't understand, and going back and saying, hey, you actually survived. This person or whatever was completely ignorant and they were trying to help you, but you couldn't see that. And, building those bridges, with other parts of yourself, I believe is very important. And just going back to Jing, I think that sometimes it's hard for us to have the full amount of energy that we could have, because we do have aspects of ourselves that are tied to other people. We do have aspects of ourselves that are still reliving trauma that we haven't fully dealt with. So it's a great time to do that. And Jing, also, can be heavily expelled through a lot of sexual overexertion. And there's some great books on that. I highly recommend Cultivating Male Sexual Energy, Cultivating Female Sexual Energy by Monticue and Maniwan Chia. But just going into the importance of Jing and how easy it is to expel it, and getting different practices on how to harbor it and recirculate it through the microcosmic orbit.
Well, and really understanding, again, even you talked about the conversation with the inner child, the conversation with the subconscious parts of our core, right? That become the underlying factors of why we do what we do and how we do it. And even taking that a layer deeper and looking at ancestral patterns. And, the Jing in its most vital concentrated substance form is that of the egg and sperm that holds all of the genetic potential and information to create a whole human and preserve an entire lineage. And when we expend that energy on things that are not related to or connected to our value that we've maybe we've missed from our inner listening, being distracted, or, you know, our outward exuberance and accomplishments and all of these things that we, you know, stay in perpetual yang mode in our modern society. We miss a lot of the connections of the subconscious realm too, that begin to carry through tendencies of our genetic, you know, experiences, right? So we have the connection of winter and the bones and the genetics really being able to carry the value of that information, the good, the bad, the ugly, the strengths, the weaknesses that were given to us, and then knowing how to get in relationship with that and have a process in mastering that. And it really does start with that inner listening and that ability to recognize that we do have a finite amount of time in these physical bodies. And, you know, the Jing is said to be present at the moment of conception that provides the blueprint for all potential that we will carry through in our human existence. And the moment the kidneys stop functioning and we take our last breath is like when that hourglass of vital energy has ran out. And so recognizing, you know, things like Qigong and Tai Chi were originated in these Taoist alchemical practices to preserve this vital energy and recycle it, like you said, and repurpose it for spiritual cultivation, for physical cultivation, and for taking us to other dimensions and potentials that our genetics maybe are just waiting for us to discover, but that we essentially don't take an opportunity to exist in those ways because we're wrapped up into so many other things. And it takes energy to crack open the potential of the self, which opens us up to even the sense of this contraction all the way in the winter is what touches us into the fear to stay alive and the willingness to take that fear and put it into courage.
Absolutely. And I think when you talk about the subconscious, it's hard not to bring up, and water, it's hard not to bring up the moon. You know, the moon and its consistent like ebb and flow. It's, you know, it's moved from newness to waxing to fullness, you know, this whole circle of the moon, and like how during this time it's also important for us to be able to look at the moon and like move in accordance with the moon. You know, and looking at that, the structure it provides around like kind of like how we govern ourselves, I think is very important. I mean, I'm a high believer in like moon waters and like charging crystals in the moon. And
I heard it's all the rage with the teenage girls now. I had been seeing some things on Instagram of how the maybe 12-year-old, 13, 14-year-olds, like moon water is all the rage now. I was telling my daughter, who's around that age, like she was saying to us yesterday that she doesn't like water. And that poor thing, the girl tells me she doesn't like water. And of course, this turns into like a 4-hour lecture. We've got Godmom on the phone. We've got Godmom's mom over there. And, you know, we're just like going in and giving her like knowledge, wisdom, and understanding about water. And I was like thinking like, wow, you know all of these things tangibly. But then I was thinking to myself, like, what is it in this child that doesn't like water? Like, how does she get in touch with tapping into her core vital energy and then recognizing, wow, this is really valuable and I want to give it what it needs?
Yeah. And I feel like, once again, it's overstimulation. You know, when you've had Sprite for, you know, or Pepsi and orange juice and apple juice, like those represent very almost like summary, like, you know, these themes of just like expression and all this stuff. And then eventually it's like, oh, water, you know, like, you know what I mean? And I think for children, like, you know, in this society, there's so much stimulation that when it finally comes back to that core, you know, that water, it's like water's boring. You know, I used to have, one of my family members would say, bring me something to drink. And if I brought water, I'd get in trouble, you know?
Well, and for us, like, it's all we drink, you know? I mean, we do a lot of tea and water. That's about
exactly.
it. You know, a little wine and beer here and there for fun, but really tea and water. And, you know, my kids know, like, if they're allowed to order like a soda or something, it's like, oh, what's happening? It's a celebration.
Absolutely. But it could also be symbolic of an aversion to maybe something water related. Maybe it's symbolic. Maybe she doesn't like the themes that we're talking about. Maybe she's like, I stay away from water because I don't like when the party's over, or I don't like to be alone, or I don't like, I don't like to be afraid, or whatever it is that she doesn't want to kind of look within. Because that water is force. It's the reflective element. You know what I mean? It's like when you look in it, you see a mirror. You know what I mean? And it could be so hard to sit there and be super present and say, how do I accept all of me? Not just the waning moon, but the waxing moon side of me, the full moon, the new moon. How do I be invisible? And it also kind of starts getting you into masks a little bit when you start thinking about all these different moons. It's like, okay, so who am I? Am I the mask? Am I something behind the mask? Or is it that I'm not the mask, but I'm supposed to learn how to use which mask when, because they're mine. You know what I mean? It can take you off into this subconscious thing, because that's one of the things about reaching back and talking to your inner child. The thing about getting to sleep and trying to remember your dreams and things like that is it's that bridge. We're trying to get rid of that fragmentation that can so easily happen when all the excitement's happening,
Right, or getting stuck in one way of being. One of my favorite points on the Kidney channel is, and it's actually such a great point for this time of year, Kidney 7, which is the metal point on the Kidney channel. And the energetics of this point look at the process of helping tap the body into all of the different types of power that can be generated through the different expressions of water, whether that be the depth of the well of potential in a lake or an oceanic expression, or it be the tributary that is just naturally falling down the side of a mountain, or it be a wave, or it be the misting rain coming, down from the clouds. There's all of these different forms and expressions of water. And when we get stuck, this point helps us to let go of one way of doing things. And when we get stuck in one way of doing things, we don't have the potential to explore these other aspects of the self. And I love that you talked about masks, because when we go back to this idea of the core value, we have to recognize, there are certain ebbs and flows with our personality matrices. There's Elsa the teacher is very different than Elsa the healing practitioner, or when I'm in a session, or when I'm cooking dinner with my family. My kids always tell me I have my clinical phone voice and my not so clinical, exuberant B-roll voice, right? And so these are all parts of myself. However, when we really take the time to do that inner listening, we can recognize am I putting on a mask that's not true? Am I trying to be something that is not authentic? And then the process of having to integrate these different forms or expressions of our power, or these different ways that our personality comes into contact with these core value systems, it's not as stressful, because we're not going between masks that don't serve us, like settling in relationships that we're not satisfied in, or working a job that we hate, but we have our excuses as to why we do it. Those masks are when we really start to push that Jing energy into a place where it's kind of like a warning mechanism, saying hey, this lie you're telling yourself is taking energy to maintain, and all that energy is taking to maintain is actually taking away from the resources of maturation, growth, development, vital sexual energy, all the things that keep us kind of thriving throughout life that the Jing does. It's pulling from that. So be careful how you lie to yourself.
Wow. Yeah, that's powerful. Be careful how you lie to yourself. I think that's very powerful, how you're saying, because you can wear a mask. My sister was talking about this the other day. You can wear a mask so long that it becomes you, or at least you trick yourself into just hardening into that shape for so long that other parts of you become these repressed, shadows that are just trying to come out, and you're just ignoring them. And I know people that sometimes don't dream, and And I'm always like, well, why aren't you dreaming? And, there's certain practices and things they're doing that are blocking that communication, once again, between the subconscious and the conscious realm. And so there's fragments of them that are acting out in their waking life, they don't know why, but it's because it's going to find a way to express itself, and it's up to you to take on that communication, aspect that is water. Water, once again, is very huge on communication. And, and I know that this element corresponds to the kidneys. And in astrology, kidneys is the scales, it's Libra. You know what I mean? And so
that balance of yin and yang, really, that underpinning.
Balancing the mineral, the mineral water balance of the body, the pH of the body, like all this managing happens, in the kidneys and in that Libra element, and so, it's very important for us to be able to just have that courage. Hey, isn't that the opposite of fear?
Well, it's really the balanced expression of fear, the ability to contract so deeply into it that you have the power to withstand the process or the course to pull yourself out of it with courage, right? And it's like, I can't remember, somebody had said something to me recently, and then it was something about like, the best pathway out of fear is to actually face the fear and do it, then it's over with, right? And I was laughing because I was watching the Mike Tyson and Roy Jones Jr. fight, and somebody had asked in the beginning to Mike Tyson, like, are you afraid? He was like, yes, of course I'm afraid. That's why I'm doing this. And it's like, so if, fear obviously could be there to protect us from danger, right? And we have to recognize what is going on with that. But if we do not conjure the deeper courage and willingness in ourselves through facing our fears, they're always going to have the better of us. And they were always going to be a source of where we contract versus where we have the capacity to take that contraction and flip it on its head and turn it into something that gives us forward momentum, which water energy is all. It is about stillness, but if you watch water move, it moves with flawless, easy momentum, and it shapes the course that it goes along, right? The river rocks get shaped by the water that is moving through it. And each year, the shape of the edge of the creek or the banks of the river changes a bit because the water has wore a different pathway or, changed its course. So it's really the water that kind of cuts through things with that momentum. But if we hold it back and dam it up, we're never going to go that course, and we're never going to shape these new potentials into being.
Wow. When you were saying that with the whole courage piece, it made me kind of think that maybe the way that we can find value in pushing through fear is through wisdom, through knowledge and wisdom, like when you're ignorant about a thing, right? Perhaps ignorance or laziness, however, kind of makes you retract from whatever is unpleasant, right? It's like, oh, well, let me just do what's easiest, despite my destiny, despite, where I'm supposed to be in life, despite my purpose. Whereas with wisdom, with information and knowledge about that thing, you can find that fire, to push through, that balance of fire and water, right? The balance of fire and water that creates energy. There's a violent reaction that happens, when water and fire come together for that first, and that's energy, and that's the push through, that's the courage. And I think what you said about Mike Tyson was very inspiring. It's like, he's like, I'm a different kind of person. No, I run towards the fray, I feel like that's super powerful. And it's also about tools. It's about tools, and resourcefulness and knowing who to ask for help when, I'm a big fan of doing those call-ins like, yo, mom, have you been through this before? You know what I mean? Or, talking to a mother that's been doing this for a long time, or, or pulling from heroes, once again, pulling those archetypes into your subconscious. Maybe we all need a little Mike Tyson in our subconscious.
When you watch him, even if you, I don't know if you watch that fight, but you watch him afterwards, he's like standing there ready to continue to go. And he's telling Roy Jones, he's like, you're going to fight me again. You are going to fight me again. He's like, the other dude's, Roy Jones is like, I'm going to talk to my parents or my family. I'm going to see. And he's like, no, we're doing this again. And it's going to be us together. And you could see it in his posture, this relentlessness, which is really that continued courage and movement. And it's interesting, this morning I was training, and I'm not really a relentless fighter. Like I'm patient. I'm like more magnetic. I tend to reset myself a lot. And we were practicing this sweep where you get into the back position and you work to pull them down and sweep them, but then you pull yourself around with this momentum energy and sweep the opposite leg. So it's almost like a double, like if I didn't get you now, I'm going to just keep going and I'm going to get you this next one. And my teacher, he asked, what's the takeaway? And I could feel this like electric and magnetic current in my body just naturally. Like I didn't have to try because I connected to the essence of this kind of forward progressive energy in how I set my structure up. And it just moved through me without me trying to like fake it or put energy behind it or push it up the hill. You know, it really tapped me into an understanding in my body that when we can find these spirals and these connections to the purpose of why we do something, then things just begin to flow. And there's this effortless power that just naturally moves without us having to do anything about it, right? And so I think that if we can get into the core truth of our value, if we recognize like how precious and beautiful this finite energy we have to express in this life form that we've been gifted in this beautiful body, if we can connect to the purpose of what it's supposed to do, then we're going to stop pushing uphill and we're going to stop burning the candle at both ends, and we're going to stop expending our energy in ways that are not linked into our value. And things just like that experience I had with my training, things were just going to move naturally without force. When I happened to execute the sweep, it was the most easy, graceful thing. My daughter flipped and fell with ease. And, it was like there's nothing happened because it was exactly what needed to happen, right? So, there's no opposition. When we find truth and we find that value, things just click into place and they happen in a way with grace and ease.
Whew, I love that. That's a word right there.
Listeners, you're hearing from the artist Square Peg Round Hole off of their album Juniper, the track Juniper. If you have not yet checked out the Reasons and Season digital interactive publication, check it out for free, reasonsmag.com. Tap into all of the wisdom, creativity, integrative living, lifestyle medicine designed by the intelligence of nature and seasonal living for free that accompanies this podcast, reasonsmag.com.
was listening to a guy talk about juniper earlier, which is one of our good kidney medicines. And one thing he was saying about the plant was that it has a special talent of letting parts of itself die that need to die, to push more energy into the areas that need it. And he was saying that's why oftentimes you'll find there's a little part of the juniper plant that dies, because it's quick to be like, oh, we need more energy here, just push it all there, and like just thinking of that symbolically and how we need to like know our phases, so we know, okay, this very childish part of me, I need to regulate that now. Like I need to parent that side now. Like I can't let this run rampant. I talk a lot about planets, and, one thing I talk about is how when we're young, we're in this Jupiterian phase where it's all about expansion. I want all the gifts. I want all the candy. What are you going to be when you grow up? I'm going to be a fireman, astronaut, cowboy. And everybody's like, you can be anything. And as you get older, structure, Saturn, that the bones, become more important. It's like, because you start having to know where to find your real resources. What is really in my DNA? What do I really have? What is really mine? Instead of just being like in this dream world of just like endless possibility, the world forces things to kind of condense, So you have to know, in order to know how to maneuver through this thing, you have to know what your real talents are. You know what I mean? And, and some people talk about that with the Saturn return, which happens around every 30 years for a person, 28 to 30 years. And it represents this part where Saturn, which is represented by bone, represented by hardness and like the cold lessons, the cold hard truth, that you're faced with, start stripping away everything that you thought was yours. It says, oh, you thought that was yours? Nope, it's not. Nope, that's not yours. And what you're left with at the end of this astrological rites of passage is what you really have, and so it's like this, so it all reflects like this endless dying and rebirthing phase, which is interesting because we also have Scorpio popping off around the winter season, you know what I mean? And like that whole notion of dying and like the rebirth and then the dying again and just.
Well, and then as we come into Sagittarius, it's the fire, right? At the core that is like, what do you stand for? What is your truth? And what lights that vibration of authenticity on fire to actually express itself and give it direction and be relentless about that direction. I have a Sagittarius child. If you give her a pathway, like, hey, we're going to do it this way and we're going to do it together and we're going to watch the course happen, she'll go the course and she'll take the direction. But the moment she has decided on a course of her own action, it's like, there's no stopping it whatsoever because she has got that fire within her in the deep, deep part of her core that is unwavering. It is so connected to that inner value that it's really that which is going to carry us forward to actually procreate or bring something into existence. As the springtime returns, I wanted to expand a little bit more on what you talked about with, the juniper. I love that you were saying that because I was walking around my property today and maybe I'll count them someday, but countless juniper trees. I am surrounded by the juniper, and it's really special because it's such a potent medicine. And I knew for myself moving to this property that this winter was going to be difficult for us with the big changes and things that we've, gone through from a familial sense and, leaving the city. And I've just been sitting with these trees, and I've actually been learning how to work with a little bit of forest mitigation and, cutting back the dead branches and the way that the tree would prefer it to be cut back, and bundling things and then firewood and, all of this. So I've been having this very deep introspective process with the juniper, this beginning into winter. And I was out just yesterday noticing like, wow, there is these little areas that have turned an orangish yellow of just, complete death on certain branches of the tree where everything else is just so vital. So it's really speaks to that idea of taking the energy inward, conserving, being okay with letting go of what you don't need, and then having that courage to reallocate it to, you know, the truth or the areas that we kind of hold back on.
Absolutely. I also like how you're working with the trees in that way. You know, there's this popular myth that human beings are unnatural. You know, it's like, oh, there's the natural world and then there's man, you know, and like, we don't understand that a lot of places were actually that we think were just nature made, you know, like we think that just chance and time and, you know, but these places were managed by human beings that knew how to work with the land. And we've gotten so far removed from that because nowadays we have these lordships, right? It's like, I own this land, so you can't be here. Go to the city. Someone else like, I own all this land. Go to the city. You know, the state owns this land. Go to the city, you know? And so like these people, they're like separated from the land and they forget that we have this symbiotic relationship with it at one point where we were taking the dead, you know, branches away, you know what I mean? Which made the tree actually stronger, you know, than it would have been without our help. So like, you know, so I just wanted to give you some credit on that point that you're actually working with the trees. And, you know, with Juniper, speaking of fear, it's been one of my primary favorite plants around this time, around like ghosts. And like, I mean, because people think that stuff stops with Halloween. No, this whole
The veils have thinned.
It's thin. We're here. It's a whole phase. It's not gone on October 31st. It's not over the next day, you know. And so, and as a sensitive, I would always have these very sometimes violent experiences with the other side. You know, waking up screaming. You know, just feeling restless and seeing little things moving that I wasn't comfortable with. You know, things that were fear-inducing. To bringing it back to fear. And Juniper was one of those spirits that was a freeing force for me. You know, having a living branch in the house, you know, that, you know, to kind of send out a certain vibration and a certain type of spirit was very beautifying. And it actually made even in the scariest night, like that would be one of the plants I would keep with me. You know what I mean? Like if I was in the forest, in the dark forest, or if I was somewhere I didn't know or didn't feel comfortable, you know, having a juniper. As a matter of fact, I used to like it so much that on Christmas, you know, I used to sometimes get a branch and bring it into the house just to bring out this flavor of this time period. Like, you know, like what it represents and like what it holds is like the spirit of hope. You know, it brings in the spirit of hope. But it also has a very angelic presence, actually one of the more angelic presences from the plant spirits that I've worked with. And so when you look at that, it made me understand a lot of these indigenous cultures that are wearing the berries around their necks. You know, it's very common for some cultures to dry them out, you know, but to put thread through a bunch of them and wear them. It's also very, very common for people to burn the berries on like a coal, you know, or things like that. And it's because there's always been, I even have a book by this one guy, he ran a Gnostic church, but he talked about burning the leaves and how like angels can like form in the smoke, you know what I mean? Like has all this lore around it all over the world, you know, for the same thing. And it's interesting how, like, scientifically speaking, you know, sometimes people will say, well, that doesn't sound scientific. But when you think of it, when you have unrelated sources all saying that this plant has the same thing, it's very scientific to say, well, maybe, you know?
This is the scientific method at work, right? This observation, even though if people are just a little more touched into the subtle realm and the patterns of that, which, you know, more indigenous cultures and these wisdom traditions didn't have as many distractions and they could listen a little bit deeper. And so a lot of that comes from antiquity times and has been preserved over a period of time because the belief in the expression of that and the preservation of the ritual around it. I want to share with listeners some of your words. I'm going to read them. We explored the juniper plant spirit in this month's Reasons and Season magazine and did a whole expose on different recipes and approaches that you can use to fortify from a food or herbal standpoint the kidneys and the water element with this amazing juniper spirit. The juniper spirit holds the spirit of December. She is jovial and kind. In the dead of cold season, she stays green and active for those in need of her prayers. She is light and angelic and whispers blessings in the ears of those who can hear. She is saintly, correcting, and strongly protective. The main theme of juniper is hope, which is made manifest in the deep blue berries that she provides.
Hey, poetry.
So our artist, Grow Love, she has been taking your interpretations from working spiritually with these plants, and she has been putting them into visual representation. So definitely, listeners, if you haven't checked out the Reasons and Season magazine, reasonsmag.com, you got to go back. There's like 6 issues out now. And she has done phenomenal artwork that has embodied this poetry that you've shared with her. And it was interesting. We were visiting via text, actually, and I was over here writing all this content for this new magazine. And I was asking her how she was doing, and she had texted me about how difficult it was for her. She's doing this spray paint on canvas. I mean, they're phenomenal. And if you guys know that they're spray paint, you're going to think they're even more phenomenal. But she was telling me how the needles and her ability to paint them, it was like forcing her to tap into some of the deepest fears that she really like had about herself as an artist. Like, can I really do this? Like, how do I get this technique down? Like, it was really hitting her at a place that was, just so much of her core was required into the task of painting these juniper leaves and berries. And, so I had said back to her that it was like juniper medicine, working directly with her, helping her to get into the courage that, like, you can do this. Like, this is, you have this, you got this. And what she came up with is phenomenal. I mean, it is so, so beautiful. So she does the actual image of the plant by itself, and then she takes your interpretation and sits with it and prays with it and drinks juniper tea or sits with the berries, connects with it, and then she brings the interpretation forward. So it's been a really beautiful thing for me as kind of a, editor, curator, whatever of this magazine, to bring you two together to make this kind of magic and, really share the essence of your poetry and, like my recipes and approaches from a bioenergetic standpoint, and then her interpretation of it visually.
Yeah, it's beautiful to see it all come together. When I saw the artwork, I was really floored at how well she was able to express the things that I had seen in my subconscious, things that I had felt, but never had a visual representation for. And, so, you really do surround yourself with some amazing people, I have to say.
So you are in for a treat, my friend, because the Juniper recipes that we did this season are phenomenal. We've been having such a fun time in the kitchen, talking to the plant, visiting together, cooking together, coming up with ideas. We made a cherry juniper sauce that has black pepper and juniper all ground up into it, and it is phenomenal. We used it to make a slow cooker chicken and made tacos out of that. It came out so wonderful. It's something that could be used on any kind of game meat, anything. Like you could even add it to, a spread or put it over, people like cheeses or things of that nature. Super, super wonderful. We did a juniper cardamom syrup, which I have been enjoying with my coffee in the morning and my tea in the afternoon. And it's just phenomenal. We did a simple, very easy to follow recipe of a juniper tea. We did juniper sauerkraut, made on the counter. Very easy way to bring in some really good probiotic flavors for your winter time and accoutrement to your heavier dishes. And we also did a juniper salt. And we covered a little bit about kind of the magic processes of burning juniper as well. So you're definitely going to have to check out the magazine and try all of these juniper recipes, especially you over there, because I know you love and have such a great affinity for this plant. So you're gonna get even deeper.
I love it. I love that. I love that you're able to just like pop up with so many recipes that are amazing. Like all of those sound fun, and juniper is not like a very scarce plant, so it's like, in some places, maybe it's harder to get, so you can just order them. Do you order yours from like Mountain Rose or?
No, I am surrounded by a forest of juniper.
Absolutely. Like you're out there. You're out there where there's a lot.
The juniper that I used for all of these, I actually foraged them back in, I want to say like September maybe. And we made an herbal gin too. There's an herbal gin recipe with schisandra and rose hips in the magazine as well. So it's like a little extra juniper tonic or juniper tincture. Anyways, I had foraged these with the homeschool group. We were doing field guides and studying the plants around the region. And, we went out to do a little visitation and connection with the juniper. The kids drew the plant. They, looked at the branches. They observed it. They tasted it. They smelled it. They sat with it. They breathed with it. And everyone decided unanimously after that process that the juniper wanted to grant us some gifts. And we did a little foraging. So we got a nice little supply of juniper berries for now.
That is so awesome. That it's also a very powerful medicine. It's a strong medicine, especially for people that may be experiencing anything in the urinary tract, urinary tract infection, especially early onset, so if you have some tincture, or if you've gathered some berries, it could be as simple as, gathering some berries, putting them in a jar and just pouring like a 40% alcohol over them and letting it sit for at least 6 weeks. After about 6 weeks, you have a very strong and aromatic tincture that's great for, it's great for a lot of things because it's pungent. It's, it's got those volatile oils in there, so it expels gases and things of that nature. But getting the kidneys moving, if there's like a bogginess or like some sort of like heaviness in the kidney, area, you will find great success with that. And if you're having urinary tract infection issues, early onset would be great to use this in a pretty high dosage, but then kind of phasing out to Uber Ursi, for a longer period, is recommended. But I don't think there's anything really stronger as far as
and people, juniper itself is antimicrobial, antibacterial. It's also a diuretic, so it's going to help that fluid balance of the body. If you're retaining too much fluid, again, it's distributing that fluid the way that the body needs it to be distributed and getting all that vitality and mineral energy where it needs to go. And then again, for the emotion of fear, right, and being able to move forward, keeping things fluid, not getting stuck or contracted. And when that water energy wants to move, it needs somewhere to go, and being able to kind of tap into that movement quality. I think juniper, from my experience of working with it, and then also eating it and making all these recipes for the last couple of weeks, I've been super digging in deep with the juniper. It really is keeping things more fluid for me.
Yeah, I see that too. I think, so that's the thing with a lot of these plants, people can kind of get stuck in medicine mode, oh, if I have a kidney issue, that's what the juniper berry's for. It's like, no, like spiritual issues, emotional issues, anything associated with the themes of juniper, it will work on just by you bringing it into your house, having berries, putting them, in areas on altars, putting them in your pocket, like there's so many different ways you can harness the powers of this thing. And it's not just about like, oh, what I have to wait till certain things come around. No, you can literally grab a couple berries and pop some in your mouth, on occasion, you know what I mean? Just to keep things moving, and especially in this cold season, And I like that you said about its diuretic properties because, help the kidneys out, you know what I mean? And another way is through sweating, a hot tea, it would take a little bit of pressure off the kidneys, that are trying to filtrate everything. But yeah, get the skin involved, and
when it's good for the skin, it's also been used as an antiseptic quality for the skin, for wounds as well. And, like gin and quinine together has been used to treat malaria, to induce a sweat, to actually clear a pathogen out of the body. One of the magical or spiritual components of this too is protection, but also protection against theft is one of the themes. And when we go back to our conversation about the Jing and our vital essence and the lies we tell ourselves and each other and what we put our energy into that's not authentic to us, it's almost like, are we being stolen from by ourselves in our own, irrational psyches? Or are things pulling away from our vital energy and taking our attention and requiring things from us, like our relationships or our work or, the things that are not authentic to us that we're still giving over to? So you can actually work with the spirit of juniper to call back the things that have been stolen from you and almost demand the protection of retaining those things energetically. So I think, again, is it scientifically proven? Is it anecdotal? But if, we have so many of these differing juxtapositions of spiritual and physical manifestation of these plants that we've been exploring through this project and through, this isn't anything new. We're just, putting a new spin on it and visiting about it here in our Reasons and Season project. But really, yes, this is preservation and storytelling and reminding, of really that we are part of nature. And why I wanted to create this project was, if from a tonic herbalism standpoint, if we could give people a framework to think about, hey, kidney, bladder, energy, this is what's going on right now. These are the organs that need a little bit more support. Like, here's a way to get to that. Bring in some, cherry juniper sauce into your diet over the winter, drink some juniper tea. So it's not like going in and using like toxic doses of herbs to treat things. Like, yes, we can go there with herbalism, but this concept was taking it from like a food is medicine standpoint and from a tonic herbalism standpoint. And it's looking at, hey, this is like, still green outside. It's probably one of the only things that's still green or will stay green. These berries are still beautifully deep. They're the color of the kidneys. They're accessible to you at this time of year. And there is, through antiquity, research upon research and stories upon stories and experiences upon experiences that show us that this is really something that is useful at this time of year. So if we can start thinking about being useful with supporting our body during the highlighted seasonal expressions that we're naturally ebbing and flowing through, then we have taken care of more of our day-to-day rhythms and ebbs and flows and connected ourselves back into a framework that taps us into an idea of, lifestyle medicine and right living in relationship with the environment around us.
Amen to that.
Hey, drink some juniper tea.
Landed that nicely.
So listeners, you're going to have to stay tuned for next month. If you haven't yet checked out Reasons in Season, reasonsmag.com, check out the podcast. You can subscribe. There's all kinds of great wisdom. Monticue and I have been going back and forth for the last year on all of the different seasons. And, it's really been enjoyable. We're, moving to this monthly format. We're going to see you guys next month. We're going to dig a little deeper into fear. We're going to dig a little deeper into what it means to be in the dead of winter when everything around us is really, really quiet, and how we can support vitality to, renew ourselves into what's next. Listeners, you've been tuned in to the Reasons and Season podcast. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes, share with your friends, and check out reasonsmag.com to tap into all of the integrative, creative, wellness, health, connectivity, art, creations, and culture through the seasonal lens of natural rhythms and elemental intelligence. reasonsmag.com.
Lullabies perfectly.